Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Lunch and Learn series. So we're up to looking at the visioning and purpose conversation to improve engagement. And obviously all these conversations are important, but I think I'm sure you'd agree they're often neglected. And the result of that means that we sometimes get suboptimal performance. And that's obviously not an ideal situation. So I'm going to talk very much around the visioning and purpose conversation today and explain why it's important and, basically how to go about it and what the results of that will be. So if you've got questions and you'd like to ask those or make comments, I'd encourage you to do that. And you just have to go to the Q&A box or the chat box and just type in your question the moment you see it, you think about it, because I don't want to leave 10 minutes for that awkward silence while we're waiting for people to gather their thoughts around questioning. So last time we spoke, we talked about the GROW model, and you might recall that the model was really based on goal, reality, options, and way forward. And it's an excellent way of having a coaching conversation. And I hope you've had a chance to try that out because it works extremely well, but you've just got to have the courage to give it a go. Basically, it means, of course, you've got to ask more questions than anything else. And it can feel a bit strange to do that and not give people an instant answer. But of course, if you give people an instant answer, then what happens, of course, is you're just making them more and more dependent on you. And that's a problem because they'll just keep coming back to you with similar sort of questions, and you'll get upset and frustrated and wonder why people can't think for themselves. It's often because you're not training them to do so. So that's what we covered there. And if you look at the program and where we're up to, we've obviously covered being an authentic leader in Unit 1. I've shared with you my 5 conversations framework, and I hope you've had a chance to put that into place and have regular check-ins with your team members, because I think, if there's one key theme running out of this Lunch and Learn series, it is the need to have regular catch-ups with your team members. And the 5 conversations framework is a great process to use. Now, last time we met, of course, as I said before, we touched on the GROW model, and I won't spend any more time on that. So really, we're ready to launch into the visioning and purpose conversation to improve engagement. So before I start, are there any questions or comments that people might have that I can respond to? All good? Okay. So let's get stuck into today. Now, we are, of course, living in a world of distraction. And in fact, it was Warren Bennis, the great management consultant, that said in the latter part of the last century, which wasn't that long ago, 20 odd years ago, he said that the biggest challenge of the 21st century is the management of distraction. Now, I think he was 100% right. I mean, we're getting bombarded from information left, right, and center. We're spending too much time on our mobile phone. We are getting distracted by what's on television. Everything is a distraction, and really to maintain your discipline in this day and age and to be very focused on what you need to is a difficult proposition, no doubt. We're all challenged with that. So one of the reasons that we're talking about a visioning conversation is the very fact that we're living in a world of distraction. Now, I'm going to share with you some tools around what you can do in order to perhaps improve your capacity to get others in the team focused. What sort of conversations can you have to do that? And I'm going to share with you a concept called the Team Values Charter at the end of this, which I think you'll find very useful and very, very effective in your own teamwork. So essentially 3 things that we're wanting to cover today. Okay. So, look, as I sort of alluded to before, time management is not the problem. Okay. Now, most of us know what to do in terms of, we should have a to-do list and we should concentrate on the most important things first. I mean, I think most of us are aware of those things. The question or the challenge for us is it's distraction management that's the problem. It's the things that get in the way that bombard us every minute of the day. They're the things that are the challenge. It's not managing time. In fact, you can't really manage time. It just marches on whether we like it or not. And all we can do is manage ourselves. So, but it's the distractions that come our way that become the problem. And being able to manage those distractions is really the issue. You can't stop many of those distractions, but you can manage them. And it's not just you that I'm talking to here. I'm also talking about your team members and the need to get them to be very focused on the here and now, to get them focused on the vision and the purpose. So the management of distraction, as I said earlier, Warren Bennett said, he identified the management of distraction as one of the 4 key competencies of the 90 top business and public sector leaders in the US. So he said that if you show me a really, really effective leader, I'll show you somebody who is able to manage distraction. So investing intentional attention where it matters leads to effective communication. So ultimately, it's all about focus. And I think the point I'd make about this is it's a discipline. It's not something that is natural, because human beings are curious. And when something distracts our attention, it's very hard not to look that way or listen or whatever it might be. So obviously, it's not an easy thing to do, and it does require some discipline. All right. So I think that the first thing, of course, that I'd be referring to here is making sure that you're fairly focused on what's important. I wrote an article recently called Fake Work. My argument was that many of the things that we do in our workplace are fake. Now, what I mean by that, I just turn this off for a minute so I can so many of the things we do in our world is actually fake. What I mean by that, of course, is that we have mindless meetings we attend. We have emails we've got to attend to. There's a range of distractions that we have day to day. And I argue that a lot of that doesn't have any relationship at all to the strategic direction of your business. Now, we all get involved in these things that we might call fake work. But I think the challenge for us is, how do we reduce them? How do we reduce the time and energy we spend on fake work? And if we could only reduce it by 10%, would that make a difference? I think you'd find it would. In fact, I know it would. And if you could train your team members to reduce their fake work by 10%, would that make a difference? Absolutely. So I think it is a discipline. I think there are some skills that you can learn. But obviously, if you're not walking the talk, then it's very hard for you to be having visioning and purpose conversations with people when they know you get distracted very easily and very regularly. And so this is why I'm banging on about this now, because obviously you have to set an example. If you don't set that tone and example, you're going to be put into a position where people will see you as hypocritical, and then you can't have these conversations that I'm referring to. So it's important to get that right. Let's go back to the slides. So Simon Sinek, I'm sure you would be familiar with his work. Simon Sinek came up with the concept of starting with the why. And what he argued was why we do things is at least, if not more important than how we do things or even what we do. So his argument was that, he's got these 3 concentric circles, and on the outer rim, you've got the what. So this is what you do. Now, all of us have a to-do list. All of us have a job description. We know there are certain things that are required of us in our job. And all of us are no doubt aware of those things. So that's the what. So that's not an issue. We all know what. Now, the how is the expertise, and that is how we go about doing these things. And of course, we recruit and select people on the basis of their technical competence. And so we can assume, I guess, that people know how to do things. So the how is not a problem. But what Simon Sinek was really referring to in his golden circle analogy here is the why. Do you know why you're doing what you're doing? And the why is critically important, because the why means that we can see the forest and not the trees. The why is an understanding of what the big picture is. The why is understanding how the work that you and I do is relevant to a bigger objective. Now, your job, of course, as a leader is to explain wherever possible to people the why, because a lot of people lose sight of it. They can't connect the dots between what they're doing and the end result. True? I'm sure you'd agree. And so if they can't connect the dots between what they're doing and the end result, what it means is that they're probably not going to see any relevance in what they do, and therefore they drop their performance as a result of that. So the why is extremely important. Now, just to give you a little example and insight into this, I did some work in a local government environment not long ago. And what I did was I interviewed some outdoor workers in this council. Now, these people were the people who work on the graders, and they'd work in the depot. They would repair potholes in the road. So these people were out and about, and that's why we call them outdoor workers. And then I also, the question I asked them was very simple. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? And I got a result back, and I aggregated that result, and it came up with a score of 6.6, right? So it's 6.6 for the outdoor team. Now, some were higher, some were lower, but ultimately it was 6.6. I also went into the indoor staff and I asked them to rate their job satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10, and they rated it a 5.7. Now, I was startled by this result because I thought that the indoor staff would have a higher level of job satisfaction than the outdoor staff. I just had this impression that they would be doing more interesting work. But so I got a shock that there was quite a discrepancy between the aggregate score of the outdoor staff and the indoor staff. Now, I decided out of my own curiosity to investigate that further. So I went and asked the outdoor staff, what is it they like about their job? I wanted to get some sense of what it was. I mean, they rated it at 6.6, so they weren't a cock a hoop about it, but certainly 6.6 is quite healthy. And I asked them why, and they said, and the main answer that came back was that they said that we can see the results of our effort. So we can see the bridge we've built. We can see the road we've repaired. We can see the garden we've trimmed. So there was a line of sight between what they were doing and the end result, you see. Whereas with the indoor staff, who were pretty much writing reports and messing around with numbers and all the rest of it, it was harder for them, or is harder for them, to actually create a line of sight between what they're doing in the office and the end result. So the point I'm trying to make for you is that the more you can create a line of sight between what people are doing and the end result, the better their work is going to be, because they can see the full picture of what they're doing. So here's some questions that you might ask in the visioning conversation. Now, these are the questions that pretty much are addressed So one of the questions that's really important in the visioning conversation is what's important? Could you confidently say that your team members could tell you what's important to do and perhaps what's not? Now, they might say everything's important because that's not necessarily true, but do they really know what the key focus is of the team? Do they know what's not important? Not what's not important doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't get done, but it basically means that it doesn't take priority. Do they know that? What's changed? Where are we headed? Could people articulate what the end game looks like? What do I need to do now and in the future? Are people aware of that? Are people working on purpose? I mentioned earlier about the concept of fake work. You may find that fake work is part of what your team do. And of course, as I said before, there's certainly an amount of fake work that will never be reduced. So the question has got to be, what can we do to minimize it? And that's what the visioning conversation is all about. So Simon Sinek in his book reminds us, and by the way, it's a great read, Start with the Why, How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Take Action. But he basically says that it doesn't matter what you do, it matters why you do it. Now that's a really interesting quote, isn't it? So if people actually know the why, then the doing part is the easy part. But most people, as you know, rock up to work, they have a very low engagement level. They come to work and basically go home that night, and maybe they've done several things, maybe not. And they come back the next day and they repeat the process. Now, it's not for you to sort of run motivational talks or whatever with your team. It's really about really giving them a line of sight. Here's a simple thing for you to do. If you got your team together at the next meeting and you went around the room and asked them, what do we get paid to do? What do you think people would say? Some people would struggle to say anything, and the reason is that they'd never really thought about it. Other people would struggle to say it in one sentence. They'd probably want to give you a list of things that they do. Other people would be way off in terms of what they do and what they get paid to do. But what an interesting exercise to get people to get very focused on what they do, and then listen to what everyone has to say, and then feed back to them what you've heard. It could be a very interesting. It certainly would be far more interesting than just a mindless reporting process at the next meeting. So 20 minutes, it could be a very interesting discussion. What do people get paid to do? Now, let me give you an example of what I'm referring to, because sometimes this stuff gets a little esoteric. And what am I really getting at? I want you to think about this situation, and it's a true situation that I was in. And this was a story about a person who was at the end of their shift. So this was in a manufacturing environment. So they're in a production environment, and basically in this environment they made they were working with metal, and the work itself wasn't particularly exciting, very routine, you could imagine, in a production area. And it was towards the end of a shift. So at the end, now this production area went 24 hours a day, so there was basically 4 shifts across 24 hours, and this was one of the shifts. And this shift finished around 5 or 6 p.m. that evening. And of course, everyone in that shift was tired, and they were looking forward to getting home, seeing their family, unwinding, all the rest of it, the things that we do when we get home. But before everybody left, the managing director of this production area came into the production area, and he asked one of the people who were just about to pick up their bag and leave if they would mind sweeping the floor. Now, this wasn't sort of necessarily standard practice. They'd sweep the floor once a day, but not after every shift. But the person asked them to do that. And of course, you can imagine that that wouldn't have gone over too well with the person who was just about to leave. But the managing director explained to them the reason why he wanted him to sweep the floor. He explained to him that that evening they had a potential new buyer, a potential new customer who wanted to inspect the production area because they were going to move their supply chain across to this company potentially, and they just wanted to see how things operated in the production area. And the managing director thought, well, I've got to create a good impression here. So the best thing I can do is make sure that the place is spick and span and things are picked up and the area is clean and tidy and all the rest of it. And that's the basis of the story that he told this person. He told this person, moreover, that it's quite possible that this person could bring a significant amount of business across, and this could lead to, obviously a lot of job security, perhaps even, opening up more opportunities for jobs. Now, granted, the person on the end of the broom wasn't all that excited, but the point is, at least they understood the why. And the reason I'm telling you this story is for something that's extremely mundane like that, that manager still saw the value in explaining the why. And I think it's true for you too in the work that you do. So managers don't communicate purpose enough, I think, for two reasons. I think one of the reasons that they don't do what the managing director did in that production area is because it takes time. Obviously you've got to spend a bit of time talking to someone and explaining to them the why and giving them some sense of what they're doing and how it fits in with a bigger picture. I think that's one reason. I think the other reason that managers don't communicate purpose is based on the assumption that they think that everyone who's working in that area actually knows what it is that they do, or they understand the purpose of what they do. This is a major mistake. I mean, the surveys show that probably 4 out of every 10 people in the workforce don't know what the strategic direction is of the organization they're working for. So it's not as if it's something that people know. And so I think for those two reasons, managers avoid doing it. And it's a big mistake not to have these conversations with people around purpose and direction. So I'd ask you to think about that. What's the line of sight between the mundane tasks that people do in your work area and the end result? And so you ask someone to put what might appear at least to be a mindless report together, and they produce a fairly substandard document. It might make the difference if they knew what that report was for, how it would be used, and what influence it could potentially have. But maybe the person writing the report doesn't know, or maybe even doesn't care. So having a vision conversation with them is extremely important to do that. When people are asked to do jobs that are commonplace, it shows some dignity to them to explain the worth of the work that they're doing. So here's another perspective. It's not just a case of extracting a little bit of productivity out of people. It's also dignified to explain to people the relevance and importance of what they do. So if I haven't convinced you around the need to do it to perhaps help people get a line of sight between what they do and the end result, could I indulge you in the potential to be more dignified with people? Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, well, doesn't it sound a bit condescending if I'm explaining all this to people? Well, is it really? I don't think so. I think it's important. It shows a couple of things. It shows, one is you're very clear about the value of the work that they do. That's a good thing. It's also showing that you understand the value of the work they're doing. It also means that you are, you know, connecting the dots between the simple task that someone might be doing in the end result. So there's a lot of value in explaining that to people and giving the people a sense of what that is all about. Because let's be honest, if the job wasn't important, there wouldn't be a job, would there? So obviously there's some end result there that is critically important and does make a difference. The fact of the matter is human beings want to feel as if they're making a difference. They want to feel they're making a contribution. That's a normal human emotion. And in order to do that, of course, they need to know how they're making a difference and why. And so the important thing is that we as leaders have to have those conversations with people. So here are some questions that you might consider in terms of sharing a vision. Consider these 3 questions. So if you're working with someone and you're wanting to have that conversation with people, and it could be in the hallway, it could be anywhere, why does this job, task, or project make a difference? So why does it make a difference? I mean, if it didn't make a difference, then why are they doing it? Of course it makes a difference. The question is to think about what that is and to be able to articulate that to the other person. I mean, if you can't understand the difference it makes, that is the difference a job makes to somebody else, I can assure you they probably can't understand it. And that's not good. So that's a good question. Have a think about it. And it could be a job, it could be a task, or it could be a project. Why is the team member's contribution important? So how are they contributing to this project? How are they contributing to the team? How is their job making a difference? And, giving some thought around that and explaining it to people is very, very relevant. I find it interesting. I went out to a induction ceremony at Oxley here in Brisbane for Queensland Police, and basically this was the ceremony the swearing in ceremony for new police officers. It's a big deal. The police certainly make it a big deal. And what struck me as really interesting was the amount of excitement and positivity and energy that was in this ceremony. These young recruits were very excited about the way forward. And it just made me think, why is it that within maybe 3 to 5 years in the job, does all of that get knocked out of them? What is the reason for that? Because you see, at the beginning of their careers, and I think we're all the same, regardless of what the career might be, we're all idealistic and we're all excited. And we all think we can change the world and we want to change the world. That's ultimately how we come into the job. If you go to university and you do a course and learn a profession or whatever, you're doing that because you want to make a difference. So we're all there to start with. And for some reason, as we go through our working life, these things get knocked out of us. And yet it's the same job we're doing at the beginning as we are now in many respects. So something's changed. And this is the reason that I think it's important to think about it. The third question you can ask there, or ask yourself to start with, is why is it important to do it right and be accountable? So one of the things you can do, I think, having these visioning and purpose conversations with people, is I think it's a good idea to explain the consequences of not doing it right. So it's one thing to talk about the why when people do it right and they do it, as well as they can. What could be the consequences of not doing it right? Could there be safety consequences? Could there be inaccuracy that leads on to mistakes? What are the issues? So there's two ways of tackling this. You can talk about the upside, as in what the end result will look like if people are willing to do that, right? But you can also talk about the downside, that if people put together sloppy work, what the consequences of that might be. So these are questions that you need to ask yourself. You need to be able to answer those questions and then get together with your colleagues at different times. And the good news about the visioning and purpose conversation is that you can do this at any time. You can do this basically in the corridor. It can be an impromptu type conversation that you can have with people. But don't be afraid to have that conversation. You'll be surprised at how incredibly useful that is. Okay. Another thing that you can do is tell stories. Storytelling is a very, very powerful form of communication for sharing a vision and emphasizing the relevance of work. If you can tell a story about where you have made a mistake, it's even better, because now we're adding a dose of authenticity to the story. And I'm going to tell you a story, and a real story of not only is it a real story, I'm going to tell you the story of how of something. At the moment I'm mentoring a young, I guess you could call them a cadet. They want to become a consultant, and they're starting out in their career. They don't know, obviously, they're not sure where to start, what to do. We've all been there. And one of the messages I had to get through to this young consultant is the fact that they needed to do their homework. So the idea was that when they went out to an organisation to assist them, they needed to understand the problems that the organisation had and what some of the key issues that they face, because obviously that is important. I'm sure you would understand that. But anyway, I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to just give them a lecture on that, because frankly, they're probably not going to listen to me. So I decided to tell them a story, and this is how I went about it. And this is, of course, as I said, a true story. It happened to me. So this is sort of how I told the story. When I first started out as a consultant, in those days, the idea was, and I was working for a large consultancy firm, the idea was you had to book up as many appointments as you could. And through law of averages, some of those key, some of those sort of meetings would lead to work. So by having a lot of meetings, you get a good chance of getting some work. So I dutifully went about doing that and booked up all of these appointments, as you do, you do what you're told. And I got this one appointment for a large organisation here in Brisbane, which is still going, and it'll remain nameless. But I got an appointment with the managing director of this very large company. And I was very excited about that because, this was a big deal. So it was a Friday morning that I got to go out to see this managing director, and I got there a little bit earlier, and the receptionist ushered me into the boardroom, and I sat down in the boardroom in the big, this massive mahogany desk. And I sat at the end of it. I didn't think I'd sit at the head of the table because I thought that would be the managing director's spot. And anyway, I had my compendium open and my notes ready to go. And then the door opened, and in walked the managing director. And of course, I stood, and in those days you'd shake hands. Did that, and we did that, and we sat down. And I could see that the managing director was fairly agitated. In fact, he said to me, after we did the niceties and the introductions and all the rest, he said to me, "You don't know anything about our business, do you?" Now, obviously I knew the products they produced. I had some idea of that, but what he was saying, of course, is that you don't know the issues that we're facing and what we're going through. And it's one of those things that you can't really bluff yourself your way through. You can imagine. I felt like sliding under the big mahogany desk at this point. And before I could really answer him, because he could see that I was struggling, he said, well, you're wasting my time. You booked an appointment with me and you didn't even have the courtesy to find out how we operated and what we did. And now I'm wasting my time sitting here. And of course, now I felt about that big, you can imagine. And anyway, I apologized profusely because I couldn't think of anything else to do. And I said to him, if I do my homework, would you be willing to see me again? I thought I'd try and salvage it, but of course, it was too late. Credibility was gone. And I walked out with my tail between my legs. Now, I told that story to the apprentice I was working with. And what I found, that story had a huge resonance, as you could imagine. Now, if I just said to him, you need to do your homework before you go and see your clients, because if you don't, it's probably not going to work out very well for you. They probably would have thought, oh, well, yeah, that's just something. I won't worry too much about that. But you see, it was important. And I gave a very real example as to why it was important. And of course, it was the most humiliating, or one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. So I'm just giving you the power of a story. And I think that when you're talking to people, talk to people about where things didn't work out for you. And you don't need to say too much more because you have explained the purpose. You have explained your rationale. So that's something you might like to think about. Let's go back to my slides. So storytelling is very powerful. And now I'd like to share with you, as we're on the home stretch, the team values charter, which is something that's gaining a lot of resonance out there at the moment. And I'm pleased to say, and it comes from one of my books, The Influencing Toolkit. Now, in this charter, what happens is that you basically can run this at a team meeting. Now, you might say, well, we've got corporate values, so why would we want more values? This is not about, replacing corporate values. This is simply about creating a charter within your team about how each of your team members would like to be treated while they're working within that team. That's all it is. And so, it's not crossing over corporate values or anything like that. It takes about 20 minutes to do, and you'll find that it's extremely powerful and it works extremely well. So what you do is you ask people at the next meeting to come armed with something to record some answers on. They should normally do that anyway, of course. And you need to do this as well. So, they might have a pen and paper or an iPad or something, whatever it is. Now, you might say, well, surely couldn't I get them to do this before they come along and it'll save us time? No, because the law of averages is there's probably somebody in your team that won't do it, and then you're back to square one. So just do it all together in the room. Okay. So you've got 4 questions that you ask in this meeting. And what you do, of course, is you have already responded to these questions and you ask these questions. So you create a team conversation. So your first question is, you ask everyone to write the answers down. What is one value that's important to you when working in groups and teams? Now, you can see what I've done is I've given you my take on that. So if you ask me that question, I would say respect. Okay, I just write respect down. Other people will write different values down. So you wait until everyone's written the value down and they're looking up, and then you say, well, what is your definition of that value? And they write down an answer for that. So if you ask me what my definition of respect would be, I might say respect is when people are prepared to listen to others, even when they may not agree with their point of view. Okay. So, I mean, respect could mean a different thing to other people, but that's certainly what it means to me. And then you wait for everyone to finish writing that down. And then question 3 is, why is that value important to you? Now, this is really interesting because it gives you an insight into what your team members are thinking. So if I was to respond to that, and I would say, I like to feel that I'm respected and my opinions valued when working with others. That's my answer. Okay, that's why I picked respect. Now, the final question is, and this is where the rubber meets the road, what behaviors would be consistent with that value? So I might say, not interrupting someone else when they speak. Okay. So what I've done here is I've effectively asked people how they want to be treated in my team. So once everyone has written down those results, I will then go round the room and I will then ask everybody to respond. So everybody's got to give a response to all of those 4 questions. And I can guarantee to you, you will hear a pin drop. It's very, very palpable and very interesting as well. So, have a listen to what people have got to say about that. And try to encourage, if possible, some interaction. So what you want is people to ask questions for clarification and make comments and all the rest of it. That's probably quite useful as well. So I'm trying to get a conversation going in the team. Now you find it works extremely well. You start first. So you start with your own answers to those 5 things, and then you basically go around the room. And what happens is that you end up with a charter, and the charter is a series of values and a definition for each value. The other 2 questions don't need to be put in the charter because that's just a way of clarifying what it is. So you get someone to record all this. Now, you might find that there are 2 people in the team that have exactly the same response. They might both write down respect. That's no problem. In fact, it's a good thing. It means they're both thinking the same way. But what you should do is encourage them to go away and to write one statement that encapsulates both of their points of view about that value. So in other words, they've got skin in the game. And then you produce this charter. And the good news for you is that you have created a purpose in the team as to how we will deal with each other. And you'll find that this is very, very powerful. And the reason it's powerful, you might say, yes, I know about values, and we've got a chart, we've got a thing on the wall, a plaque on the wall. And all. Look, the bottom line is the big difference between this and what's on the wall is that you have got people to contribute to this. People have skin in the game. And when they have skin in the game, the quid pro quo is this. I will, and everyone will be prepared to treat you with this, will honor your value, whatever that value might be, on the proviso that you will honor out these other values that are in the charter, you see. So it's enormously powerful. And where you will find it very powerful is when people are holding each other to account. That is enormously powerful. So it works out extremely well, and give it a try. It also means as a leader, you can hold people accountable basically for, what you'd normally do, which is systems and processes and procedures, the things that would normally, the normal KPIs. But you now can hold people accountable for values. So, for example, if somebody's just got off the phone to an irate customer and they've been very, very stroppy, clearly not professional, you could sit them down and say, how did you think that call went? And they tell you, and say, do you think it was consistent with our values, our team values? And of course, if professionalism is one of your team values, it's probably the answer is no. But what you want them to do is to be consistent with that. So that helps you to create a line of sight between the team values and what happened. So it works out well. It's a great concept, and I strongly recommend that you give that a go. You'd be surprised. What questions would you like to ask me at this point, if any? Just go to the Q&A box and we'll hear what you've got to say. Here we are. We've got a question here. Does the team value charter need to be published? John, yes, I think it does. I think if it's good enough to do it, it's good enough to publish it. Otherwise, of course, people forget it. It's good to have a visual representation of that. And I think that you can, you can sort of frame it and put it on the wall if you choose in the meeting room, or you could put it on the desktops of everyone. You could post it out to everyone. You could have it on top of the agenda items, whatever you do, but it just reminds people of why they should honor each other's value in the team, values. And the other thing is, if you get a new person coming into your team, I would also put them through the process of asking them those questions, because you want to conclude them, wouldn't you, in the team values charter? And if someone leaves, I have a tendency to leave it in as a way of honoring their sort of contribution to the team. So look, it's a great tool, works extremely well. Strongly recommend you give it a go. And in fact, I'd suggest to you as homework to give that a shot. Complete a team values charter in your team and give it a shot and see what happens. You'd be surprised. Maybe you can come back and give me a little bit of feedback on how it goes, but it's certainly worth a shot. That's for sure. All right, so that's your homework. And next time we meet, we're going to talk about the Unit 5, which is the encouraging conversation to build commitment. I'll be sending you out a copy of the slides and the recording from today. And the idea is, of course, to do your homework, and we'll catch you in a fortnight. So I'll just turn that off for a moment. All right, so folks, that's it from me. Thank you, everyone. I wish you a really nice weekend. If you're in Melbourne, probably you're going to be indoors, but nevertheless, for the rest of us, we might be able to get outdoors, but we'll be thinking of you. So thanks, everyone, and we'll catch you in a fortnight. Thanks and goodbye, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you and goodbye.